In Book 2 of Plato's Republic, Socrates and his friends use their imagination to build up all the required elements of a city. This is the famous city in speech. And they start off really by focusing on the basics, like you need farmers, okay, but then the farmers are going to need implements, so you also need carpenters in this city, merchants, and so on. So basically describing like all of the division of labor and a free economic system. It's kind of remarkable. It's like a prototype of the social contract and capitalism. Once they lay out all of the professions, Socrates asks his friend Adeimantus, and he says, "Has our city then, Adeimantus, reached its full growth, and is it complete?" "Perhaps," says Adeimantus. "Where then," continued Socrates, "can justice and injustice be found in it? And along with which of the constituents that we have considered does it come into the city?" "I cannot conceive, Socrates," replied Adeimantus, "unless it be in some need that those very constituents have of one another." See, this is very remarkable. They laid out a city that takes care of the basic necessities. It sounds like a libertarian heaven, okay? But they're not really sure how justice and injustice is going to play into it. Then a little bit later, Glaucon steps into the conversation, and he says that this is like a city of pigs. It seems like Glaucon is hoping for something more than just food and survival and property. Imagine living in a city that treats you like a pig, okay, cares for you as if you were a pig, and doesn't ask you to be anything more than a pig. Would you even cease being a pig in that case? Wouldn't it be like being trapped in pigness? like you're enslaved by pigness? Wouldn't it be nice to be free? Well, today, of course, we discuss precisely that. It's our second view of freedom as based on virtue. And today, we also have stuff I like, so make sure to stay tuned for that. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Jim Horan, and this is the Worldview Bros. Let's get started. So on today's show, we continue the three-part series on three different views of freedom. And today we're going to look at the second view of freedom, which is freedom as based on virtue. If you didn't watch the last episode, that's quite all right. This can be a standalone as well. Though I do want to give you a very brief recap. The first view of freedom we explored is the type of freedom that was examined in the English Enlightenment period, as represented by John Locke, among others, and implemented by the founders of the U.S. in particular. Okay, we call this freedom a negative type of freedom because it seems to be mostly about others not doing bad stuff to you. It's the most obvious kind of freedom that we can think of, like not being in jail, not being subjugated, etc. We talked about that. Now, this view of freedom is the kind that libertarians in particular promote. Okay, libertarians, of course, are in favor of the smallest and most limited possible government so that this kind of freedom may thrive, right? And we talked about how there's a pretty good summation of this. It's expressed in the very common phrase that my freedom to throw around my arm ends precisely where the other person's nose begins, right? We get the picture. Now, there's an added complication here because there's a lot more to the Founding Fathers' view of freedom than that simple phrase. Okay, the problem is that it's only the substance of that phrase that is remembered in our society. Okay, we seem to have distilled the rich and beautiful logic of freedom and equality as explained by our Founding Fathers. We have distilled it into something boring and base, okay? Oh, so freedom just means do whatever you want as long as you don't bother anyone else. You see, it's this distillation that we all kind of recognize as that libertarianism, right? But what I'm trying to say is that for the Founding Fathers, the Founding Fathers were not just mere libertarians. Their political philosophy was richer. They were libertarian plus, if you want to put it that way, okay? And I actually want to go back to that diagram here real quick, okay? This diagram where we have the three views of freedom. And so what we actually have to do is we have to make a subdivision here, okay? So in the first category, we've identified the negative type of freedom. Well, this we have to subdivide into the mere libertarian view and over here, the view of Locke and the founders. Okay, to me, there's a big difference. I know that they're going to seem similar, but there's a difference. Notice I'm putting it right between the first and the second types of freedom because that's precisely where I think it should be. Okay, but more on that later. We need to move on to now the next view of freedom. All right, so the view of freedom we explore today is a positive sort of freedom. It's not about others not doing harm to you or restraining you. Okay, it's more of a goal that is achieved through action, the action of living according to virtue. Also, very important, this view of freedom is really less about each individual and more about the society at large. All right, so we need to think, what do we mean by virtue and why is it about the society at large? And honestly, we need Uncle Aristotle to help us out with this one. Okay, he'll explain it all to us. See, Aristotle is not unfamiliar with the libertarian view of freedom. He actually addresses it in a passage that we're about to read. Okay, and nor is he really against it in its proper place. He would ultimately disagree with Locke that the main duty of government is to simply secure that kind of freedom to its people. Aristotle would say, "Oh, wow. So what, Locke? Are you saying that the whole point of living is just to survive and not to be in jail and to move around and do what you want? Like just eat, move around, survive, and do whatever you want? That sounds like a city for animals. That sounds like a city of pigs." And of course, we see that example in Plato's Republic as well, right? A city of pigs, a city that just worries about life going smoothly and commerce taking place. Like I said, I mean, it's like a libertarian heaven where everyone's rights are respected and there's a free economy. This is what a lot of the critics of this aspect of the Enlightenment, this is what they call bourgeois society, right? But let me go to Plato and Aristotle. Why do Plato and Aristotle call it a city of pigs? What's their problem with it? And it's this. It's because for Aristotle and Plato, the question goes beyond freedom. Okay, they're not even really thinking about it in those terms. They're concerned about the good. Aristotle talks a lot about the good life, right? We talk about the good life sometimes, right? You hear that phrase, like living the good life. I don't think that we typically mean by it what Aristotle means. Okay, Aristotle, the good life, he's talking about virtue, and we're talking about like drinking mojitos by the pool. You know what I mean? So no, what Aristotle means by the best life or the good life, he means the good life, the best life that we can possibly live. A life of meaning, y'all. A life of fulfillment, of happiness. For Aristotle, and I'm just using Aristotle here as a representative, for Aristotle, the good, virtue, nature, happiness, freedom, these are all ideas, these are all words that are tied together, right? We see this a lot. Very often, a lot of these notions, these ideas, they kind of have to go together. You can't see some of them in isolation. And we could get into some major tangents here, y'all, but let me give you the shortcut, okay? In the Nicomachean Ethics, one of Aristotle's best works, what does Aristotle mean by these words? The good, virtue, nature, happiness, freedom. Here's the thing, if you call a pencil a good pencil, why? Why is it a good pencil? Oh, well, it's because it has like a sharp tip that you can use. It writes pretty good. The wood is good quality. You can grab it pretty well. The eraser on it works pretty well. Oh, so the pencil is living up to its nature. It's fulfilling its virtue. Now, this is what we call teleology. This comes from the Greek root telos, and that simply means an end or a goal. Okay, Aristotle's philosophy is very teleological. It has to do with the ends of things, the purpose of things. So a pencil is a virtuous pencil if it fulfills its goal. And we can tell the goal of something by examining its nature. So notice I'm using all these words. It all comes together. Okay. To know the virtue of a pencil, you need to know the nature of a pencil. And if the pencil fulfills its end according to its nature, the pencil is virtuous and good. Why would you call a horse a good horse? What's the virtue of a horse? Oh, is it to eat, to live, to survive? Well, not quite. I mean, that's true of all animals, so that's like included, right? But it's not particular to horses. To know the virtue of a horse, you need to know a lot about the nature of horses. I don't really know anything about horses. I mean, so I wouldn't be very good at coming up with the virtue of a horse. I mean, I guess it depends on whether it's a race horse or, a packing horse or whatever. I don't know, right? And it's okay not to know. The point is there's probably a virtue of a horse. It's easier to come up with other examples. The point is that for Aristotle, there's a point to everything. There's a point to being a pencil. There's a point to being a horse. Guys, there's a point to being a human being. Okay? I mean, his philosophy is so refreshing to the modern ear, right? I mean, in an age where we have a deep meaning crisis, right? We've been conditioned to think that we can't know anything if it wasn't investigated first under a microscope, right? Or, like some physics lab, okay? But some realities in life are not observable under a microscope, like what it means to be human. To know the virtue of a man, we need to know human nature, okay? If a man fulfills his end, his telos, according to his nature, then the man is virtuous. And if virtuous, good. And if good, then happy. If happy, then free in the fullest sense. Freedom is based on virtue. So, I mean, that's the basic idea, all right? But let's add another layer. Let's add another layer here. There's certainly a sense in which this freedom is also a freedom from something. Right? I mean, we've said this is a positive kind of freedom, but we can also understand it in part as negative, because we can say it's freedom from something. Freedom based on virtue can be said to be freedom from our untamed desires, from our untamed passions. Don't forget, in this view, freedom comes with virtue, and the virtue of man is reason. Now, reason... you guys probably know this, but reason in the Greek language, the word is logos, and that more literally means speech. Okay, so what Aristotle and the Greeks, they're tying reasoning with speech, right? And there's something very important there, because what they're trying to say is that reason is not going to come about unless if you're talking with someone, right? You can't just talk to yourself. And what exactly are we going to be talking about that is like so reasonable? Okay. Well, what reason means here is reason is figuring out the things that are specifically human. Things like what is just and what is unjust. What is advantageous and what is disadvantageous. Of course, I'm going over the Nicomachean Ethics, right? So he talks about these things. What is beautiful and what is ugly. See, this is what humans do that no other animal can do. It's our virtue. Now I have a question. Can this virtue, the development of our discerning reason, of our logos, can we do that on our own, in isolation? No? Well, no, of course not. How are you going to do some logos if there ain't no one to logos with? That's the thing. This is why Aristotle says that man is by nature a social animal or a political animal. We can't fulfill our telos, our end, our virtue, if we don't talk with people. And again, what are we going to talk about? Are we going to talk about where to get food, where to find shelter, how to reproduce? Are we going to talk about those things? Well, sure. I mean, we'll talk about all those things, but you know what? Even all the other animals communicate these things too, don't they? You know, like whales, dogs, right? They have to figure out where they're going to eat or if they're hunting, whatever. But no, logos about how and when to eat is not logos in its full sense. In its full sense, it's about the things that are uniquely human. The just and the unjust, the beautiful and the ugly, okay, right and wrong. So you've probably heard this before, the good, the true, and the beautiful. You actually hear that that phraseology, right? The good, the true, and the beautiful. You hear that a lot in a lot of classical education colleges, like Hillsdale, right? Or a lot of Catholic universities, where I went, University of Dallas. We're always talking about the good and the true and the beautiful. Why? Because those are the things that are specifically human. Those are the things that pertain to our virtue, the things that are fulfilling in our lives. This is why I'm always telling you that, don't listen to those people who say, oh, don't talk about politics and religion. False, right? I know I say this a lot, right? But no, we have to talk about the things that take us out of our comfort zone of small talk and all, right? Because we are human beings and we need to fulfill our humanness. And one of the main ways we do that is by talking to each other. And look, it doesn't have to be about politics and religion all the time specifically. I mean, I think those are like some of the big things. But again, the good, the beautiful, right? So like art, novels, okay? And I'm not saying that you guys don't do that, right? But I'm just saying, don't be afraid to take your conversations with people to a higher level. And I'm speaking to myself, guys. I mean, if you're anything like me, starting up a meaningful conversation with people can be pretty hard. Maybe we start with the small talk about the weather. I mean, if we're guys, right, we're probably going to talk about sports a little bit. Or maybe we talk about the latest Marvel movie for the 27th time. So might I suggest, and I'm talking to myself, okay, let me suggest that maybe we're a little afraid of talking about more important things. It's a big risk, right? I mean, maybe I'll antagonize that person. I mean, after all, they might have different opinions than me. And that would just be awkward. Guys, I mean, isn't that kind of the spirit of our age? I mean, is it not? Like, oh yeah, people have their personal opinions and it's no big deal. Just keep the peace, no confrontation. Just keep it to the most basic things. Guys, you know what that sounds like? That sounds like a city of pigs to me, y'all. Okay? And I'm talking to myself, okay? When was the last time that I spoke with my neighbor? You know what I mean? I'm actually going to get into this a lot more next week. Alan Bloom, I don't know if you guys know Alan Bloom. He's a famous philosopher, back in back a few decades, but he addresses this problem in society. There's a famous book that he wrote. It's called The Closing of the American Mind. It's a really important book, and I agree in many ways, though I also have some disagreements. But sorry, I am getting sidetracked. I was talking about how we need others to logos with, right, in order to achieve our virtue, in order to be free in this sense, right? I'm trying to make the point that this kind of freedom can't be built upon an individual in isolation. This idea of freedom only makes sense in the context of a community, okay, what the Greeks call a polis, a city, which is where we get the word political. Political just means the things of the community, okay? And, this is where many thinkers, they observe that the Aristotelian view of freedom here is ultimately incompatible with Locke's view of freedom. Well, I mean, what I would say is that there's a lot more to Locke's view, and I'm going to get to that. But there's no doubt that Aristotle's view of freedom So this second view of freedom, there's no doubt about it. It is incompatible with a purely libertarian view of freedom. Listen to this from Aristotle's work, The Politics. This is in Book 3 of The Politics, and Aristotle is talking about how a political community needs to be more for the sake of noble deeds and not merely about living together. So he says this: "Nor do people merely come together for the sake of an alliance to prevent themselves from being wronged by anyone, nor again for purposes of mutual exchange and mutual utility. Otherwise, the Etruscans and Carthaginians and all those who have treaties with each other would be citizens of just one city. But they're not concerned about what each other's character should be, not even with the aim of preventing any one subject to the agreements from becoming unjust or acquiring a single depraved habit. They are concerned only that they should not do any wrong to each other. But all those who are concerned about a good state of law concentrate their attention on political virtue and vice, from which it is manifest that the city, truly and not verbally so called, must make virtue its care." So yeah, that's a repudiation of a purely libertarian view of a community. Aristotle is saying, the relationship between the cities of Etruria and Carthage, and any other cities for that matter, is probably just about commerce, right? He talks about mutual exchange and utility, assuming that they have like a peaceful relationship. Otherwise, they might be looking at war and stuff like that. Okay. But yeah, the relation between cities is usually just about commerce. Like we understand that even now, right? Like we don't usually look at or pay too much attention to other countries, right? I mean, we just care about other countries insofar as we can have commerce with them and have peaceful relations, right? And yeah, so likewise, the people from Carthage don't really care about the habits and character and virtue of the Etruscans, but they do care about the habits, character, and formation of their own citizens. I don't know if I'm making the point. So a true political community cares about the virtue of its citizens because the goal of the city is to fulfill the virtue of its citizens. It's not merely to exist in peace. The point is that a man is not a city unto himself, is what he's saying. Okay. So I don't know. I feel like I'm overcomplicating the point, but this is a very important point right here. Because I think we see it even today. Imagine if our relationship with each other in America were like the relationship of America with China or Mexico or Canada, right? Well, there's, again, other countries probably just care about each other insofar as they can have peace and commerce. Is that really the way that we're going to treat each other in our own country? Shouldn't there be more of, more than that? But, a purely libertarian state does seem to suggest that, right? That that every individual is an island unto himself. And think about it, right? I mean, we see it intuitively. This is the criticism that we would make to like some hyper libertarian guys, right? They're a guy who's like, "Oh, give me my liberty and just get the hell away from me." Okay, man, I'll get the hell away from you. I guess you're not going to Logos with anyone. So nice knowing you, pig. And of course, guys, I'm speaking to myself. Like I said, when's the last time that I spoke with my neighbor? This is true of all of us. I mean, we all have experienced what it is to live in a regime, to live in a city where we're kind of becoming more and more isolated from each other. It's a city of pigs, y'all. I mean, all of this makes a lot of sense to me. But let's actually move on a bit. And I'm almost done going over this, but there's yet another layer that we need to look at. And I want you to consider, given this view of freedom, how important the role of education becomes, right? Under this view of freedom and virtue, the role of education becomes very important. And this is so critical. This is very important. And let me ask you this, y'all. What in our current culture do we think education is mostly about? And let's not lie. Let's not lie to ourselves. It does seem, in my opinion, it seems like for the most part, the societal consensus is that education is really about learning some knowledge and skills so that we can have a good job and so that we can make a lot of money and provide for our needs. So an education for pigs. Aristotle would say that if education is merely for the sake of ultimately making more money, then that fits right in with the city of pigs, y'all. No, in this Aristotelian tradition, education is not at all primarily for the sake of valuable skills and knowledge. No, it's primarily about learning the virtues of a human being for the sake of virtue, for the sake of our true freedom, okay? This is where we get the term liberal education. Liberal education doesn't mean like liberal in the modern political sense. That's just a semantics accident, okay? Liberal education is liberal. It's tied with this because it's tied to this idea of freedom as based on virtue, the human virtue. It's about the fulfillment of a human being. And so again, this is why like universities and schools that have like a classical education, this is why they're always talking about the good, the true, and the beautiful, right? It's all right here because the good, the true, and the beautiful, those are the things that are particularly human, the things that go with our reason, with our logos, and that go with our virtue. So if a school talks about those things, the good, the true, and the beautiful, you know that their purpose of education is really centered under this idea, this way of looking at human freedom as human fulfillment, right? Now, so in Aristotle's city, sure, the parents are responsible for educating their children, for bringing them up beautifully, as he says in the Nicomachean Ethics. But here's the thing, ultimately for Aristotle, and even more primarily, it's actually the job of the city itself. To be a city for mankind instead of a city for pigs, the government itself needs to make sure that children are taught virtue. So, this is what Aristotle would ask. Do you live in a city for mankind or do you live in a city for pigs? And of course, this is the critique that people on the right side of the political spectrum make of our current society, that we have detached ourselves as a society from the pursuit of virtue. The question is whether we've been led down this road because of the first view of freedom. Now, let me be clear. I 100% agree with the second view of freedom. I do. I agree that freedom, in a more exalted sense, means the fulfillment of our telos, of our end, of our purpose as a human being. And by the way, I haven't even touched on how Christianity takes this view of freedom and builds on it. It improves on it. But that's going to have to wait for another show to be sure. I kind of needed to start with this more basic foundation that we get from the Greek philosophers, okay? But again, the big question is whether the first view of freedom is simply incompatible with the second. And so some people who are right of center are pro the American founding. I'm one of those. I'm pro the founding. I'm pro Locke. But there's this other segment of people who are politically on the right that are at the very least suspicious of the American founding. Some of them are downright hostile to it. And so these are conservatives that are called like paleocons or tradcons, okay, meaning like traditional conservatives. So I'm thinking of people, and maybe this is a little bit more in the past, but I'm thinking of people like Robert Bork. I talked about Alan Bloom, Irving Kristol. Some examples of current people. I mean, I would put Michael Knowles in there for sure. Okay, you guys probably know Michael Knowles from the Daily Wire. That's where Ben Shapiro is. So how does Michael Knowles, for example, compare to Ben Shapiro? And I would say, yeah, they're different kinds of conservatives. I'm a lot more with Shapiro. He's very pro the American founding. Okay, Knowles, I would say he isn't hostile to the founding, and he'd probably find it politically prudent to not criticize the founding openly. But take it from me, he's at the very least founding suspicious. Okay, let me put it that way. But anyway, I'm gonna pick it up from here, guys, on next week's show. If you don't mind, we're gonna have to have an additional episode before we get to the third view of freedom. We do need to explore further the Tradcon critique of the American founding and to what extent it holds up. Okay, spoiler alert, I don't think it holds up. I really don't think that they understand the political philosophy of the founding fully. I mean, if I say so myself. But anyway, I'm going to have to leave it there for now, y'all. Don't worry, I'm going to show you why freedom and equality, as the founders taught us, absolutely holds up. I mean, I think it's a beautiful political teaching. I think it holds up. But for now, we got to move on. So let's move on. I'm just going to end today with a stuff I like. We haven't done that in a while. So for this week's stuff I like, I want to show you this video from Steve Deace. And Steve Deace is one of my favorite podcasts. So I highly recommend that you put him on your list and that you give Steve Deace a listen. So he, of course, is definitely getting into the Christmas spirit lately. It looks like he's releasing a Christmas music album. But of course, given these last 2 years and these unprecedented times, Christmas can no longer be merry if it's not COVID conscious. So let's take a listen.
Nothing brings back warm Christmas memories like the songs and carols you love. And only pericarditis and his mRNAs have all your favorite holiday songs in one non-random controlled study.
It's beginning to look a lot like a Vax Pass to get into anywhere you go.
From inspiring hymns like
Oh, holy spike, the protein bloodstream trembling because they lied and it don't stay in your arm. Oh, little town of Wuhan, we can't believe you lied. You're run by creeps who should be put to sleep. Those bats, they don't live nearby.
Two traditional Christmas classics such as
The 12th decade of lockdowns my true lords gave to me. Absolutely freaking nothing. I've been home since Christmas. You can Zoom with me. Said your kidneys to the people far and near. Do you fear remdesivir?
Then there's those funny novelty songs to lighten the mood.
Grandma got run over by a chromo. He left her to die in an infected nursing home. I really can't stay. Baby, it's COVID Stan. I really must go. Can't, baby, it's COVID Stan. I saw mommy masking Santa Claus because the CDC said so last night. Jingle bell, jingle bell palsy. If you dare get that booster, then you sure are ballsy.
And of course, we remember the reason for the season.
Fauci, did you know that your virus would someday wreck the world? Fauci, did you know that your science doesn't know what's a boy or a girl? It came upon Anthony Croce, a sulfuric presence of old, from demons deep within the earth, who knew that his soul was sold.
But that's not all. This collection has so much more to offer, like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Redfield, All I Want for Christmas Is My Fifth Vaccine, Deck Rochelle with Facts and Data, Whitmer Wonderland, Little Jabber Boy, Have Yourself a Little Waning Efficacy, Happy Christmas, This Is Never Over, and more. All this can be yours for a high price we can't name yet because inflation, but don't let that stop you from this once-in-a-lifetime collection. Call now at 1-900-666-VAX to order. Only available while supply chains last. Must be double masked when you call. Again, that's 1-900-666-VAXX.
Okay, so you guys probably hated that. I freaking love that video, man. I think I've seen it like 20 times now. I can't stop watching it. I don't know, just the horrible singing just kind of clinches it. But well, guys, why don't you leave me a comment which one of the songs was your favorite? My favorite is the Baby It's Cold Outside spoof. I mean, that's freaking brilliant there. But more importantly, please leave me a comment or a question on anything that you have on today's show. Do you have any opinions on this second view of freedom? What do you think of the criticism of the city of pigs, right? Of the purely libertarian kind of society. I'm trying to get a mailbag ready. I'll probably do a mailbag section on the next episode. So let me know what questions you have, and I'll try to address it on the mailbag next time. And of course, next time we'll be looking then at, again, like I said, the critique of the Tradcons, and I'm going to try to defend our founding fathers against them. And then after that, we'll do the third view of freedom. And also somewhere in between there, I'm not sure exactly what day we'll do, but we're going to do a Christmas special, and Sal will be joining me for the Christmas special. So make sure that you don't miss out. On that note, make sure to turn on your notification button on your YouTube and, give us a like, guys. Please comment any questions, any observations that you have. I want to learn from you. Make sure to share this with Uncle Charlie, okay, or anybody who's interested in these like political, philosophical things. I think that's a wrap for today, y'all. So be well, and I'll see you on the next episode.